Good morning and welcome to the weekly review on Teachers Talk Radio, the show where we review the week in education. Joining me today, we have got Nathan Ginn, we've got Leanne Lax, we've got Brent Poland, and we've also delighted to be joined by Emma Wilkinson. Emma's a freelance journalist and she's got something quite significant to say about the second story that we're looking at because she's directly involved in it. In terms of our stories today on Teachers Talk Radio, firstly, Ofsted's Chief Inspector, Amanda Spielman, has refused to drop one-word assessments of schools, saying that the gradings are integral to the school system. Second story today is about Sheffield's last maintained secondary school undergoing forced academisation. We're going to be looking at the parents who are opposing this and looking at whether it's the forced academisation or joining one particular trust which has caught their eye more. And finally, we're going to be looking at potential guidance being published by the Department for Education, which would allow single-sex schools to be allowed to ban transgender students. We're going to be looking at what Gillian Keegan has said on the matter and whether any of her comments compared to previous years are in direct conflict. Our first story today is all about Amanda Spielman. Those of you who have been watching the Sunday Politics television shows would have noticed that Amanda Spielman was on the BBC this morning talking to Laura Koonsberg. And we will, if we have time, come on to some of the things that she said on that. If you want to get involved and you want to tell us what you thought about Amanda Spielman's interview this morning, then if you're listening on YouTube, you can drop a comment and we'll see it. If you're on Twitter, you can tweet us at TT Radio Official and we'll be able to see that and we'll be able to discuss that. And of course, if you're listening on our live LinkedIn stream, you can drop a comment in there and we will read out your comments too. So if you've got something to say about Amanda Spielman's interview on the BBC this morning or about any of the stories today, that is how you can get in touch. So Amanda Spielman has refused to drop one-word assessments of schools despite an ongoing campaign to abolish the ultra-high stakes judgments. His Majesty's Chief Inspector described the gradings as integral to the school system and that many parents find the grading system useful. Spielman has also announced that Ofsted is piloting changes to make the complaints process more responsive. Ofsted inspectors are looking to return more promptly to schools like Caversham Primary, where Ruth Perry took her own life, which are deemed to have safeguarding issues but are performing well in other areas. So my first question, I suppose, to Leanne is, do Amanda Spielman's proposed changes go far enough, making the complaints process more responsive and returning earlier to schools where safeguarding has meant an automatic fail? Does this go far enough?
I mean, I pick up on the fact that she says parents find the grading system useful. I have to think about myself and maybe when I move schools at times and like what part of the Ofsted report do I look at? I think one word tells you nothing about a school. I would look at, probably start with like the selected grades, so the ones you get for safeguarding and leadership and that. But then also, I mean, they write full reports. So the report tells you more than one word does because it gives key examples, it explains things. She mentioned that we continue to listen, but it says nothing about acting on the listening. So it seems like they appease us by listening to us, but nothing changes enough.
Thank you, Leanne. Brent, you were nodding along there. Does Ofsted need more root and branch reform than this, or is tinkering at the edges going to be enough?
Moving the deck chairs in the Titanic, we suspected this would happen, that we knew that there would be a kind of honeyed words to begin with when this broke what happened to Miss Perry. And we were right, because they just don't want to change. They don't want to let it go. And despite the evidence, despite the head teachers unions, despite the teaching unions, despite parents themselves saying that the Ofsted framework doesn't reflect their schools, you have schools that are outstanding in practically everything, and then they feel one part of an Ofsted and they're inadequate. I mean, how many people have said to me that they teach in an inadequate school, and it's not an inadequate school because parents know, stakeholders know, governors know, the community itself knows, and they should be the ultimate arbiters of the success of the school. It's the children, the parents, the immediate community. They should be the ones judging the school, not some outsider who comes in for 2 days and makes a judgment based upon a bunch of data that probably is cold, hard, and cruel. And that is one of the things they just don't understand. I don't think they understand schools. And there's a massive disconnect between the people running the education system and the people in the education system. And so by the time they listen to the people in the education system, because it's not as if we haven't shed loud enough. It's enough's enough now. They are ignoring far too many of the warning signals. And I think this is just another example of complete blind ignorance to what's actually happening in schools.
Thank you for that, Brent. I want to go to Nathan next. Nathan teaches in Wales, for those of you who've watched a weekly review or listen to any one of his shows, and therefore Estin is involved there, not Ofsted. But I just want your view on this, Nathan, because as part of her comments this week, Amanda Spielman said that Ofsted does not have a school improvement role. She said that school improvement is a role of schools themselves, facilitated and supported by government. However, when you look at Ofsted's 5-year strategy published last April, which we assume must have been signed off by Spielman, we've asked Ofsted to comment on this and they're going to get back to us next week. It says Ofsted aims to improve lives by raising standards in education and children's social care. I can go on. We're a force for improvement through the intelligent, responsible and focused use of inspection, regulation and insights. Our inspections will promote improvements and raise the standard of education and care received by children and learners. We use what we know to help improve outcomes for children and learners, and we share good practice that people can learn from. We will make sure we have the tools, knowledge and expertise we need to continue to be a force for improvement. Is there a contradiction between the two positions, or is it just me?
You know, as I say, from a Welsh perspective, and this has annoyed me in the news again, as always, they're saying it's for UK schools. It's not for UK schools, it's for England. Wales is entirely different. We do not have one-word graded outcomes. And this idea that that is integral to the system, it falls apart when you start looking at that. The other part for me around what she said is this idea that it helps parents. Now, I can tell you my gas, my car, my bank, when I'm comparing for those things, I get more than one word. You know, this idea that parents want just one word judgment and that is what's going to do, is going to help them. It belittles parents. You know, it's ridiculous that that is all that parents will look at when choosing a school. And so that part can easily go without any change. As far as the school development thing, you know, I'm not saying things are perfect here in Wales with Estin, but it is entirely focused on school development and sharing with stakeholders, sharing a true picture with parents who want to know. You know, I know Ofsted have the short form parent reports now as well, but they want a context to it and they want support. And it is supposed to be in Wales about school development and improving. If they want to be, Ofsted want to be a checks and balances system, they need to cut out all the other stuff. You know, they've been putting out all the curriculum review reports, all of this stuff, pretending that they're there to help. Be one thing or another. And that's where it falls for me. If they want to be high stakes accountability, own it, do it, but don't pretend that you're there to help. You know, you're not.
We've had a comment in from Alan Sui on Twitter. He says you could at Teachers Talk Radio make a bit of a Gogglebox mashup with your panel all looking into the BBC interview and reacting live to it. Unfortunately, we didn't have the foresight to do that, but that was a very good idea. Now, Emma, very good morning to you. There's one particular thing that Amanda Spielman has said here, particularly about Ofsted inspectors looking to return more promptly to schools which have failed on safeguarding but have been good on other metrics, because that was the case with Kes in Sheffield. Would that have been enough, or do you think there needs to be more change?
Well, yeah, I do think there needs to be more change. I don't think Ofsted are fit for purpose. If they can find a school like King Edward's that sends the second highest number of students who go to Oxbridge schools in the whole of Yorkshire, if they can find that school inadequate, if they can find a school inadequate where 500 members of the community, students, parents and everybody else turned out yesterday to protest against the forced academisation, you know, it's not listening to the views of parents who all submitted, you know, responses to the survey for Ofsted. Got no idea whether they took that into account or not. And we've been trying to have our voices heard since the beginning. Kes is not a failing school on any measure. And this isn't about accountability. It's, you know, we're not saying improvements can never be made, but let's support the school to make any improvements that need to be made, to develop, to grow, to change. Let's support school because it's doing so many good things in so many areas that were identified in the Ofsted report. And in terms of the re-inspection, this is, we launched a petition in January that's now got more than 2,500 signatures. That was one of the things that we asked for. Do not rush this forced academisation. Give the school the chance to show that it has addressed these problems, because we as parents got a letter in January from the school saying they're unclear how Ofsted arrived at their judgment. They appealed this numerous times. The inspection was actually in September. We got version 4 of the Ofsted report in January as parents. And the Ofsted report makes very little sense. I am not clear at all how they reached the judgment that they did. But in many areas, it's good. The school asked for re-inspection and were refused. The school said, we've addressed the concerns that you raised. Please come and re-inspect us. We're open to this. And they were refused. As parents, we've said the school should be given the chance. You know, it's not a failing school. An inadequate overall judgment should be for a school that is, you know, very much failing, you know, a large proportion of students. This isn't happening. Ofsted said the concerns that they found were for a small number of students. And I would even question whether the safeguarding that they found, you know, was in fact.
Well, it's certainly not an isolated, thank you, Emma. It's certainly not an isolated case at all. We know of many other schools, particularly Caversham Primary, where late Ruth Perry was head teacher as well. And yeah, I think it raises a very interesting question about where actually Ofsted's 25-year strategy published last year talks about it being a force for school improvement. Amanda Spielman says that Ofsted is not a school improvement tool in comments this week. So there's a bit of a contradiction in terms here. Certainly on the surface, we have asked Ofsted to get back to us and explain the potential contradiction, and we're sure they're going to get back to us next week. But thank you everybody for your contributions to that story on Ofsted. It's time now to move on to our second story of the day. It's Sheffield's last stand. The last maintained secondary school in Sheffield is being forced into a trust that has two coasting schools, reigniting controversies over the transparency of academy decisions. The Department for Education wants a Brigantia Learning Trust to take over the King Edward School after its inadequate Ofsted in September over ineffective safeguarding. Inspectors said that leaders did not do enough to keep children safe, with a significant minority of pupils feeling they did not have an adult to speak to. The move has been criticised, however, by education professor Mark Boylan, whose daughter is a pupil at KES. He said that the move contradicted the government's own coasting crackdown, where schools with 2 RI inspections in a row would be moved into new academy trusts. And around 500 protesters demonstrated against the decision in Sheffield on Saturday. Now, Emma Wilkinson joins us here, a freelance journalist whose daughter attends KES. She told Schools Week earlier in the week that it's being done behind closed doors. We have asked for criteria used to select this academy trust, but have been told we're not allowed to have it. My first question, I suppose, Emma, is what is the decision which is more sort of controversial and parents are angry about? The fact that KES is being forced into an academy trust, or the fact that it's Brigantia?
Yes, I mean, since the beginning, when we started this campaign in January, we've had to fight on two fronts because parents' views are not taken into account. We have no agency in this process. So we've been fighting against forced academisation, trying to get our position very clear that we do not think this is the right approach for King Edward's. At the same time, we've had to work with the knowledge that this process is likely to go ahead anyway, and if it does, we want to have a say in the academy trust that's selected to make sure that it fits the ethos of the school, that it has a track record of good management, that it would support the school and not lead to kind of whole-scale change, which would get rid of things that the school is doing well. There was an existing relationship with a trust, a previous attempt at joining an academy called Minerva in Sheffield had fallen through on the basis of PFI debt. It was all kind of a technical thing. That academy trust, we have learned, did express an interest at this point. Yet the trust that has been chosen, Brigantia, has really reignited the outrage among parents. There are parents who didn't feel they really knew about academisation or what it would mean for the school, who were taking an interest but weren't really coming to the meetings or campaigning on the level that some of us were, who, after they learned it was Brigantia, that was it. That was, it became very clear. The thing we have to fight right now is no to Brigantia. It's completely the wrong fit for King Edward's. We don't believe, there's plenty of evidence and there's lots of previous staff members reaching out to us to show that it doesn't have the track record, experience or capacity to take on a school the size of King Edward's. So for the Department of Education, if your goal is to improve a school, why are you selecting an academy trust that has no track record of improving a school? 2 of its schools have been in requires improvement for years through multiple Ofsted inspections. That goes against Department of Education guidelines. And what message is that sending about why you're doing this? So I think that's why we attracted so much attention yesterday with the protest. 500. There were students there. There were students speaking on BBC Look North. They did themselves proud. I think, it shows we're a really strong school community. The children love, the children who were there yesterday, my childhood, my friends' children like going to school. They like all the extracurricular activities. They like their teachers. And Ofsted found that. They said pupils were engaged in their lessons because they were taught by expert teachers, specialists in their subject. Okay. If one of the schools that requires improvement at Brigantia lost 40 members of staff last year, and this is backed by records from Companies House that show the budget for supply teachers is through the roof and redundancy payments, etc., etc. It's not, there's no signs that that trust is managing its existing schools well. King Edward's is a massive, huge school, 1,800 students. In its sixth form, 50% of the children come from other schools across the city. You risk really wrecking everything that is good about this school on this limiting judgment. If we didn't have limiting judgments, the school wouldn't have come out as inadequate overall. That's what I'm trying to make. So,
well, yes, it's certainly interesting. It's certainly not the only school that we've heard of in this position. Certainly not the only school in the country which has been a local authority school, which has been found inadequate on one measure or more measures, and then has been part of a forced academisation push. Also similar with schools and single academy trusts. If I go to Brent first of all, then thank you, Emma. What does Emma's story, the story of Kes and what Emma has said, what does it tell us about how valued parents' views are on the future of the schools they send their children to?
I think parents are secondary now. Reading between the lines and seeing the pattern in the last couple of years is plainly obvious. You've got to take it from a business point of view. You've got a very successful business, small business, independent business is doing very well. And it's been taken over by an unsuccessful business, being facilitated by the government. I think it's absolutely chronically unbelievable that this has been allowed to happen, and commendable that Emma and her parents and students have stood up. And possibly if more have done this earlier for the schools, they wouldn't have lost control of their schools, because a lot of the problems we're seeing in our schools are the fact that there's no governing bodies any longer. There's no accountability. There's no kind of connection to communities. And I think that's explaining some of the massive complaints made against schools now, because there's a disconnect. Schools should be connected to the community they serve. Schools should be integral to the community. And now, unfortunately, that sort of umbilical cord's been cut between community and schools, because schools have been taken over by these trusts. And the trusts, what's the primary function? For me, it's stealth marketization of education. And I think Ofsted is being used as a tool through stealth marketization through the back door, because the government had dropped its policy of forcing academisation, but I don't think it has dropped its policy. I think this is a secret way to get every school inside a trust, and I think that's unfortunate.
Thank you, Brent.
I've got strong views on this. I've got very strong views on this. I think this country needs to stand up for its education system before it is too late.
Well, Nick Gibb would disagree. I want to come to Leanne on this. Nick Gibb says, I wouldn't worry about academisation. It's a liberating experience. It's not a punishment. It gives professional autonomy to the school. Leanne, is that your experience generally from teachers you speak to?
I don't think it gives autonomy. I think it's the complete opposite. And I mean, to comment on Brent and on parent voice, well, they seem to contradict themselves completely, Ofsted. They say that parents find it helpful and look at the grade, but they don't listen to parents. So, I mean, parents and teachers and kids are the ones that live their daily lives in these schools. So who better to listen to than the parents and parent voice? It seems like academies have become like a mythical fix for schools deemed challenged by Ofsted. And I just think, like, I mean, there's so many intricacies to schools. How can you look at it as like a one size fits all? I think that's how academies operate, is here are the standing operating procedures and please do them in your school. And like Emma said, and the facts are in the article, that it's a failing academy trust. They've got terrible Ofsted grades at some of their schools. So yeah, a liberating experience. I don't think I'd describe teaching in that way either.
Thank you, Leanne. And if I could finally come to you, Nathan, no academies in Wales. Does this mean that therefore none of your schools in Wales are liberated and none of your schools have professional autonomy?
Hey, it shows that it's a political choice. At least, we don't have academies in Wales. We don't do it. I think, the bit for me around all of this, and, I have worked in England, for the past 10, 15 years, where I've seen this happen. And I agree with Brent around this idea of community, stakeholders, governors. I was never a fan of the big local authorities when they were an issue and when academies were first brought in. I was kind of open to that, and maybe there was a touch of liberation there to break away from the kind of a big organization like a local authority. Maybe there was at that point, but now you can't tell me that if you've got community education for local people and the community there and the parents there are so passionately behind their school, that is the most powerful thing you can have in school improvement. There is nothing that can outweigh that. If your parents are on side, your community is on side, then that is the most powerful thing that can improve a school anyway. So I don't see how going against that, damaging that, putting in an academy that maybe isn't doing so well either, and putting that to the side, whether it is or it isn't. If you go against your community, you're going against the idea of community education. And at that point, what is the point of governors? What is the point of having parent governors? What is the point of serving your community? It becomes business. And that's not really how I see education.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Nathan. Also, I would, of course, say that parents do have the opportunity to demonstrate what they think about school through its parent view survey. We know that that's potentially open to, it's not the most secure system, but anybody can, in theory, offer a view on that. Emma, thank you very much for your time this morning. We've greatly appreciated having you on and hearing from you directly about what is happening in Sheffield with KES and about the fight against a particular trust. So thank you very much for your time, Emma.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Now, this show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, a leading publisher of books, directories, educational guides and magazines specifically aimed at forward-thinking schools in the UK and beyond. Have you checked out their latest releases? Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. It's now time to move on briefly to our final story of the day. Government is considering issuing guidance to single-sex schools in England saying that they cannot be legally obliged to take transgender pupils as part of advice to be released before the summer holidays. The advice, first reported by The Telegraph, is also likely to include direction for schools to inform parents about children questioning gender identity. It's being drawn up by the Education Secretary Gillian Keegan and Kemi Badenoch, who holds the Equalities portfolio, and it comes after the Girls' Day School Trust, or GDST, said last year that it would only admit pupils based on sex rather than gender. The guidance is expected to say that schools would not be breaching the Equality Act 2010 if they did not accommodate transgender pupils, although no pupils would be required to leave a school if they started questioning their gender identity. This would mean that girls' schools would be able to reject applications from pupils who identify as female but whose legal sex is male, and vice versa for boys' schools. What is our initial reaction to this story? I'm going to cold call, and I'm now going to choose Brent, first of all.
Is this the greatest priority of our government with regards to schools and education? Is culture wars and wedge issues? Sorry, but we need guidance. Yeah, we absolutely do. But does that take too long ranking government officials to wade into this? I don't think it's helpful whatsoever. I think it's unfortunate that seems to be a priority. Is these faux culture wars? It says guidance, so I don't think that's actually going to help schools, because guidance means you're advised or not advised to. I think there's legal issues there as well, because people will interpret the Equality Act the way they interpret the Equality Act. So I don't think that's going to be very helpful whatsoever. I think that's going to muddy the waters more than anything else. But maybe that's the whole point. Maybe they're trying to muddy the waters. What I don't like and what I really, really object to is this idea that we teachers have to inform parents, that we're duty bound to inform parents. If a child comes to me and says to me that it's fearing for safety because, you know, they're old school parents from, say, for instance, an Eastern European background who are very strict religiously, won't respect the child, I will do a report on that. And then obviously, what am I to do? Ring up a parent and be the person that tells the parent? I think this is very, very dangerous, what the government's trying to suggest, because it basically flies in the face of us looking after children. And I think it's very, very, I think we're going to be moving more towards this during the next couple of months, because these stories seem to be happening a lot more in schools.
Thank you, Brent. Nathan, this guidance doesn't apply to Wales. Education is devolved. But what is your reaction to this potential guidance?
You know, for me, it's who is this protecting? You know, that's the bottom line. All of our legislation around this, all of our support around this should be about protecting people, protecting young people. And this seems to be, when they're talking about, you know, you can't be legally obliged to do something you don't want to do as the school, you know, or take some hardline stance that you want to do, or enforce your gender beliefs on you know, on your school community. They can't be legally obliged to do that. It seems like it's to protect the schools, and that's not the way around it should be. You know, we should be looking after individuals and people who are, you know, facing incredibly difficult situations. And I don't understand why. Well, I entirely understand why the government would side with the not the underdog. You know, I think the legislation should be there to support the underdog, and not this way round. It really worries me, the terming of it. You know, you can't be legally obliged. It suggests that someone has, you know, had to go through a battle here, you know, maybe through the courts, to get something that's their right. And they're saying, actually, do you know what? If you don't like it, if you don't agree with whatever the issue of the day is, then no one can make you do it. And that really worries me about where it puts the power, where it puts the authority, and where it puts the support, because it should be about putting in more support, not rejecting people. And that's the way this seems to me. It seems like it's about rejecting and pushing people out rather than supporting and helping people.
Thank you. And Leanne, Gillian Keegan, as Education Secretary, has said, we can't mix up sex and gender. We've seen what happened in Scotland when it got that round the wrong way. And really, our guidance needs to provide safeguarding for all children and make sure that, you know, it does cover all children's rights as well. 3 years ago, when she wasn't Education Secretary, she said, I recognise that more must be done to help transgender people with the unique and difficult challenges that they face. Trans women are women, and trans people deserve equal and fair access to healthcare, safe spaces and opportunities, as well as to live their life with dignity. Is this me, or is it a U-turn? And is this a contradiction between the two statements, Leanne? Can you help me out here?
Yeah, it does sound a bit confusing. And I think, like, Nathan got it right. The angle of the story comes from an adult, and like an adult perspective, a parent perspective. It says that parental consent is paramount. And I just think, like, our job first and foremost is to provide a listening ear to the kids. Irrelevant to what the government advice is or government guidance is. We don't always get the best advice from them anyway. So I think the kid's voice is paramount in it, not the parent voice.
Thank you, Leanne. Yeah, really interesting. I'm sure we're going to hear much more about it. The guidance is due to be published later on this term. But that is the end of our final story of the day. So without further ado, it's time to move on to our shows of the week. I'd like to start this one today, and then I'm going to go over to Brent, then to Leanne, and then to Nathan. My show of the week this week was by Nathan Ginn himself. It was his show, Sarah Alston, on Thursday, The Twilight Show, all about working effectively with your teaching assistant, the book published by Bloomsbury. Yes, it's just a primary, it's a book mainly for primary teachers, but as a secondary teacher, I found it very useful on those occasions when I have it. Oh, he's so excited, he's had to leave a room. We've embarrassed him. We know that. Hey, brilliant. working effectively with your teaching assistant. And yeah, such a treasure trove of strategies to help deploy teaching assistants effectively. One of the things that Ofsted are looking for at the moment in England, particularly in secondary schools, is how well teaching assistants are deployed in classrooms and outside the classrooms. So it's really, really important for that. So yeah, Nathan's show, Working Effectively with Your Teaching Assistant with Sarah Alston, published by Bloomsbury, was my show of the week. Brent, over to you.
Yeah, I really like Damon's. I think it was debut. I think it might be his debut show on Friday night. It was, yeah, and it was role models, male role models in school. So really interesting take on that, because obviously throughout the years you sort of notice that schools are more female dominated than male dominated. We've got obviously the situation with the likes of Andrew Tate. So we do need strong male role models. So it was interesting to see what Damon's take on that was. Very interesting show, but really worth a listen back. It was Friday nights, I think late show.
Thank you. And over to Leanne for her show of the week.
Mine was The Perception of Teachers, was from Hannah Wilson. I think I've said it a few times on the weekly review that as teachers we have terrible PR sometimes. So, I mean, everything she said, I agree with, and I would probably say myself. I think it's, she mentioned that it's easy to say teachers don't care, and I think it's harder to try and understand our daily work life. So it was a great show.
And over to Nathan for his show of the week.
Mine was Graham Stanley on Saturday. He had Christian Still on, who's written this book, Test Enhanced Learning. Really, really interesting stuff. Like if you've read some of those books on retrieval practice, this is like the wraparound of that. So it was talking about pre-testing, some of those parts. But yeah, a really interesting show. And yeah, I am going to buy that book off the back of the show. So yeah, really interesting. Christian Still, Test Enhanced Learning, that was.
Fantastic show. I really enjoyed that as well. We've had a comment in from, I might pronounce her name wrong, I'm very sorry, Asa Melanda, says, quoting Nathan on the weekly review this morning, saying the most powerful school improvement is having a school with parents who stand strongly behind their school. Yes, that is why all schools must cater well for all students so that they attract all parents, including parents who have other choices. Thank you very much for your time today. My wonderful panelists, and of course, Emma as well, who provided that insight into what is happening at KES in Sheffield, which I'll see you next week for next week's weekly review. But before then, we're leading the education conversation. See you next time.